All right, we're going to light right into part 2, and we're going to do something kind of strange here because section 99, the next one on the list, so to speak, has actually been talked about way back in 1832. So we did a previous episode where I blew over this because I wanted to give it its time. Well, now it's its time. So this was mislabeled. Again, one of those kind of mislabeling things, which is why it's here instead of earlier. But I'm going to start with that, and then we'll move into kind of the chronology again. There's some letters and some revised plans, some cool stuff here. All right. So the earliest copy that we get here is by the hand of Frederick G. Williams, a very clean copy that we find in Revelation Book 2. So very clean. Thank you, Freddie. Really good handwriting. We also get a copy in Revelation Book 1, which is John Whitmer this time. Also very, very clean. Section 78 is where it sits in the original Doctrine and Covenants. And get this, boys and girls, it is not found in the manuscript history of the church. Very, very strange. So I tried to double check this, but if you look in the original doctrine, well, not the original, I'm sorry. If you look in the 1981, I always compare those two just to show how the churches sort of modified things based on the knowledge that they got from this historical endeavor. They actually don't mention that Section 99 was in the history of the church. So even back in 1981, when they were making all of this, they kind of acknowledge in a way this is not coming out of the manuscript history. So very interesting. It's just not there. So an introduction to this section that we get, Revelation Book 2 simply says, Hiram, Portage County, Ohio, August 29th, 1832. Revelation Book 1 says, Revelation given March 20th, 1832, Portage County, Ohio. So we've got a bit of a conflict here with when this happened. We don't get much in the Doctrine and Covenants. And in the modern section headings, there is, again, no mention of the history of the church. But we do get these differences. From 1981, we get Revelation given through Joseph Smith the prophet to John Murdock, August 1832, at Hiram, Ohio. Although editions of the Doctrine and Covenants beginning in 1876 have listed this revelation as Kirtland, August 1833, earlier editions and other historical records certify to the proper information. So even back then, they did a little research, found out the dates were wrong. So 2013 says this. We get the same thing, and then at kind of the end, it says, for over a year, John Murdock had been preaching the gospel while his children, motherless after the death of his wife, Julia Clapp, in April 1831, resided with other families in Ohio. So prepare for this. The historical introduction is a very sad story about John Murdock. So here you go. We get this from the historical introduction. In early 1831, Murdock decided to devote himself, quote, full-time to the ministry, and moved his family in with another family so that he could do so. In June of 1831, a revelation instructed him to go to Missouri, quote, preaching the word by the way. Murdock followed this instruction and departed for Missouri despite the recent death of his wife, Julia Clapp Murdock, during childbirth, which left him with 5 children under the age of 7, including newborn twins. Before leaving, he arranged for several individuals to watch over his older children. Joseph Smith and Emma Smith adopted the twins. For the rest of 1831, the first half of 1832, Murdock preached in Michigan Territory, Indiana, Missouri, and Ohio, among other places. When he returned to Hiram, Ohio in June of 1832, suffering from the effects of a months-long bout with ague, he found that one of the twins had died in March. In addition, those with whom he had left his 3 older children demanded payment for their help. So he did not come back to a good situation. Now, what is the fate of the twin? I've talked about this before. Joseph and Emma had lost 3 children at childbirth or right around that time. So they had already lost 3 of their own, the children of their body. Then they adopted these twins, and so here's what happened. This is from footnote 3. Joseph Murdock Smith was sick with measles on the night of the 24th into the 25th of March of 1832, when a mob broke into the home of John and Elise Johnson, took Joseph Smith by force, left an outside door open. According to the later Joseph Smith history, quote, during the mob, one of the twins received a severe cold and continued to grow worse. Joseph Murdock Smith died a few days later. So a small child with measles because a mob broke the door open and didn't, the cold just got in. While Joseph was being beaten outside in front of the house that he was staying at, which he was technically homeless. He was staying with John Johnson on his house. Not only beat Joseph pretty badly, but also killed his adopted son. So just so you know, that's what happened. And John Murdock came back to that news. So very, very sad. And then I like to say he gets this, what's called an intense call, according to me. Despite these challenging circumstances, Murdock recorded in his journal that he, quote, continued with the church in Cayuga and Geauga counties, confirming and strengthening the church and regaining my health, unquote. This 29 of August revelation instructed him to resume his preaching, this time in the eastern United States. The revelation also told him to continue preaching until his death, unless he desired to go to Zion after a few years. Perhaps because of the problems Murdock experienced with his children's caretakers, the revelation told him not to leave until he made arrangements to send his children to Bishop Edward Partridge in Zion. This revelation's call for Murdock to continue as a missionary until his death, notwithstanding his family responsibilities, was an unusual sacrifice, apparently not expected of other early church members, and may have resulted from his earlier determination to devote himself full-time to the ministry. Footnote 5 for this says, for example, a January 1832 revelation appointing several individuals to preach declared that, quote, every man who is obliged to provide for his own family, let him provide, and he shall in no wise lose his crown, unquote, suggesting that those who could not preach because of familial responsibilities were excused from extensive service. Murdock, however, did as the revelation said and farmed the kids out. And once everything was settled and he was able to pay back people and sort of make sure that everything was done according to this revelation, he left for another mission in the eastern states. So a pretty powerful testimony, and you can take that one of two ways. Either this is way too much, and maybe there's some wrong here that, kids being here, there, and everywhere without a father, without a mother, or you can see this as a pretty remarkable story of faith. I think either one is a pretty reasonable approach, but definitely a very, very intense call, a very, very intense revelation that we now have in Doctrine and Covenants section 99. So for footnotes and content, we actually don't get any footnotes that are really worth mentioning. They're either scriptural references or stories that I've already told. So we'll just get to the call. It says, behold, thus saith the Lord unto you, my servant John Murdock, thou art called to go unto the eastern countries, from house to house, and from village to village, and from city to city, to proclaim mine everlasting gospel unto the inhabitants thereof, in the midst of persecution and wickedness, and whoso receiveth you, receiveth me, and you shall have power to declare my word in the demonstration of my Holy Spirit. And the injunction to take care of his family is also at the end of this. It says, verily I say unto you that it is not expedient that you should go until your children are provided for, and kindly sent up to the bishop in Zion, and after a few years, if thou desirest of me, thou mayest go up also unto the goodly land to possess thine inheritance. Otherwise thou shalt continue proclaiming my gospel until thou be taken. Amen. That's the death part. By Joseph the Seer and written by Frederick G. Williams, scribe. So, a very intense revelation, but he did go on his mission. We get, after this revelation, we get a letter to Missouri leaders. This is dated on August 6th, and we start getting there's a lot of letters going to be flying back and forth. So I'm going to really summarize these. Basically, this letter to the Missouri leaders contains 3 revelations that had been received, which they were already talking about. We've already gone through that in filling in the history. And then the Kirtland leaders were not really fully aware of what's really going on in Missouri, so they were asking about how are things, all that kind of stuff. We get a letter 4 days later to the Missouri leaders. This is in the handwriting of Edward Partridge. The historical introduction gives us some interesting things about this letter. It says, in this letter, Cowdery recommended that members in Jackson County, quote, look after another place to locate on. And he praised his associates for the agreement to remove the church out of the county. Conversely, Cowdery also chastised some members of the church in independence. This great tribulation, he wrote, would not have come upon Zion had it not been for rebellion. Here, Cowdery likely referred to the far-reaching rebellion of Missouri church leaders against Joseph Smith and the Kirtland leadership in 1832 and early 1833. Cowdery's letter does demonstrate particular concern for the loss of the printing press that William W. Phelps had operated. And then we also get this from the historical introduction. Cowdery rushed to complete this letter in order to post it on August 10th. In a postscript, Joseph Smith added his own words of counsel, expressed sorrow and concern, and advised the recipients to be willing to, quote, forsake all for Christ's sake. After this letter arrived in Independence, Edward Partridge made a copy of it, including the postscript from Joseph Smith. It is unknown when Partridge made his copy, though it was probably made soon after the original letter, which has not been located, was received in September of 1833. So what is that postscript? This is what Joseph Smith wrote. P.S. Brethren, if I were with you, I should take an active part in your sufferings, and although nature shrinks, yet my spirit would not let me forsake you unto death. God helping me, O be of good cheer, and for our redemption draweth near. O God, save my brethren in Zion. O brethren, give up all to God, forsake all for Christ's sake. That's the end of the letter. After this, we get a revised plat for the city of Zion. They apparently have found a few flaws in the city plan or the plat that they sent off. And so now what we have in the middle here is just 2 center blocks with 24 houses of the Lord inside of those 2 blocks. And those blocks were also reduced in size. So they've sort of made some measurement modifications here. But as you can see, very much the same, but a couple of things here and there and writing along the borders of it. We get a letter to Missouri leaders on the 18th of August. So again, about 8 days later. Lots of these come one after another, but this one contains 2 more revelations. And it also says that a temple needs to be built in Independence, and that they need to rebuild the printing office, and that Sidney Gilbert's store needs to remain. Now, again, they don't really know what's maybe going on back and forth. So in the midst of being, threatened to leave and all this kind of stuff, Joseph is sending them a plot and letters and saying, rebuild it, like, get back on it, which may or may not be the right thing to do there, but that's what the letter says. At the end of the historical introduction for this, we get some details of this. It says, shortly after writing this August 18 missive, Joseph Smith sent Orson Hyde and John Gould to Independence with the letter and other important documents, including the revised plan for the city of Zion. The 2 men left no later than the 4th of September and arrived in Independence during the latter part of that month. In the letter featured here, Joseph Smith directed church members in Missouri to make a show as if to prepare to leave and wait patiently until the Lord comes and restores unto us all things. He also offered hope in this letter by noting that church leaders in Kirtland would wait the command of God to do whatever he pleases, and if he shall say, go up to Zion and defend thy brethren, by the sword we fly. In late October of 1833, church leaders in Jackson County declared publicly that, quote, as we as a people should defend our lands and houses, unquote. On the 21st of October, quote, the mob, or at least some of the leaders, began to move. Violence soon began again, and by mid-November, most church members had fled north from Jackson County into Clay County. Now, an interesting thing here is that Joseph Smith's like, just pretend like you're leaving, but it's going to be okay. But they wound up moving anyway. So they moved to Clay County. And Clay County is going to be a center place and a very influential portion of all of this, as you will shortly see. But yeah, so that's how we get to Clay County. After this, we get a revised plan for the house of the Lord. So not only did we get a revised plan for, the city plat, but also the temple itself, which is good to know. So we do get one page here for, there's a few pages here, and one of those pages is for the interior of the building. But as you can see here, we also get some exterior views and a lot of written instructions. This is the handwriting of Oliver Cowdery and Frederick G. Williams. We currently hold this in the Church History Library. And it provides more detail about the interior space as well as needed detail of the exterior of the building. So that's another one that you get. Kind of fun to watch. This one is not pasted to some Egyptian papyrus, which makes it easier to read, by the way. After this, we get a letter to Vienna Jaques, if you remember her. Again, very influential. We're going to talk about her a lot. So the historical introduction, kind of the end of the historical introduction, kind of says it all for me. It says this. Jaques wrote to Joseph Smith sometime after her arrival in Independence, but her letter, which included, quote, a history of her journey and her safe arrival, has not been located. Joseph Smith stated that both Jaques' earlier letter and his own spiritual promptings led him to write the letter featured here. In the letter, Joseph Smith expressed his gratitude for her safe arrival in Independence, reflected on the contemporary plight and future destiny of Zion, shared news of church growth and temple construction in Kirtland, and reports of missionary success in the East, provided instructions for Bishop Edward Partridge, and gave comments about or intended for mutual acquaintances. This document is the earliest surviving letter that Joseph Smith addressed specifically to a woman other than his own wife, Emma Hale Smith. The letter was postmarked on September 11th, and though no extant record mentions its reception, it would have likely arrived in Jackson County in early October, just weeks before the violence there resumed. So there you go. A lot of details about what was in that letter, but for the sake of time, we won't be reading it. We do get a meeting on September 11th, 1833. Offered a few resolutions. We get number one, that a printing press will be established in Kirtland under Frederick G. Williams and Co., which is now where we get the original Doctrine and Covenants was published from. So I'll just show you this really quickly. I have here in my hand the replica of the original Doctrine and Covenants, and if I open up to, I believe, the very first page, you will see Kirtland, Ohio, Frederick G. Williams and Co. So this minutes of meetings established the printing press that created this book, which is kind of fun. Number two is that the press needs to publish a paper called The Messenger and Advocate, which we will start be hearing from now. And number three, that the Evening and Morning Star, which was being published out of Independence, will now be published out of Kirtland since the printing press was not quite working. It was attacked by a mob and destroyed. So kind of a fun meeting. We get some pretty significant things out of that. The next thing we get is an interesting letter to Silas Smith. Now, this letter is actually found in Jesse Smith's autobiography and journal, and it is in the handwriting of Jesse Smith. And so Jesse is Silas's son. So here's how it works. Silas Smith has a nephew by the name of Joseph Smith Jr., who becomes this supposed prophet and publishes the Book of Mormon and all these revelations, right? He's still a Presbyterian, and he has a son by the name of Jesse. And so Jesse is the reason why we have all of this stuff that we're reading today. This journal, by the way, is in the Church History Library. This is Joseph Smith's uncle. And he was aware of all this stuff, but he was still a Presbyterian. And so the historical introduction gives a very interesting story here. It says, Joseph Smith's objective in this 26th September letter was to persuade his uncle that it was both scripturally sound and reasonable that God would speak to prophets in modern times, as he did in biblical times. Most Christians of the era believed that the canon of Scripture was closed and found the idea of additional canonical revelation to be repugnant, even blasphemous. This letter is a prime example of the Mormon argument for modern and continuing revelation. In the letter, Joseph Smith heavily referenced books of both the Old and New Testaments to demonstrate that each age needs to hear the voice of God anew. The ideas expressed in this letter appeared again in the second installment of a serialized letter written by, quote, the elders of the church in Kirtland and published in the Evening and Morning Star in early 1834. Further into this, we get Joseph Smith closed this letter by expressing his hope that Silas would eventually join the Church of Christ. Jesse Smith, Silas' son, recorded that his father received this letter from Joseph Smith and that Silas, quote, was baptized in the summer of 1835 by Hiram Smith, and in the spring of 1836 emigrated to Kirtland, Ohio, with family members, including his aged mother, Mary Duty Smith. So one of his nephews writes him a letter, and the other nephew winds up baptizing him into the church. We get this from the final words of this letter. And this is, again, originally in the hand of Joseph Smith, but now we get it in this journal. It says, Or must I not rather obtain for myself by my own faith and diligence in keeping the commandments of the Lord an assurance of salvation for myself? And have I not an equal privilege with the ancient saints? And will not the Lord hear my prayers and listen to my cries as soon as he ever did to theirs, if I come to him in the manner they did? Or is he a respecter of persons? So I must close this subject for want of time, and I may with propriety say, at the beginning, we would be glad to see you in Kirtland. We would be glad to see you embrace the new covenant and be one with us. We sometimes think you are now one with us in heart. I remain yours affectionately, Joseph Smith, Jr. So a letter reaching out to his own family that wound up being successful. And now this journal is held in the archives of the church. All right, the next two things that we get a proposal for a Zion City Center from Edward Partridge. So after all the violence that had happened in Zion, in Independence, Missouri, what would be Zion, there was still this promise that Zion would be redeemed, and so Edward kept working on making modifications for the space, the dimensions, and clarifying a few instructions. So that's what this is. So an act of faith, for sure. Then after that, we get a letter to Noah K. Whitney, which is written in Joseph Smith's own hand. I'll just read it to you. It says, Brother Noah K. Whitney, Brother Whitney, I write this because I forgot to tell you of some things that you ought to know. Dr. P. Hurlbert is commencing an unjust suit against Brother Hiram to get the property of this farm which belongs to the firm. Brother Hiram, or not father, has not got any property here, but one cow apiece, which I have a bill for all the rest made over me more than 1 year ago for books, and that they owed me, and it will involve me in or the firm if they will let him take this property, which you may rest assured belongs to us. A word to the wise is sufficient. Joseph Smith, Jr. Again, not the best speller, so I apologize. But basically, he's trying to sue Hiram Smith over property that Hiram doesn't even really own. He just has a cow. Anyway, he's just trying to make a fuss over there. So the good doctor, after he had some inappropriate relations with some females and got busted for it, is not very happy about it and kind of retaliating against these brothers. So there you go. That is our second part to this. Next, what we're going to get is a very interesting warrant, a very interesting tactic used apparently in early American history to try to drive people they didn't want out of their town. This was done to more than just Latter-day Saints. And we also get into our 100th section of the Doctrine and Covenants, and we are not even done with 1833 yet, so stick around.